Evan Riker was just trying to get home, but within minutes every cop in Westford was searching for him like he was a ghost slipping through the night. Evan Riker's life had always been predictable, and that predictability was the only reason he never sensed the disaster waiting for him that night. He left the warehouse after another tiring shift, thinking only about getting home, reheating leftovers, and sleeping until sunrise. The town of Westford was unusually quiet, wrapped in a cold November wind that made every street feel empty. As Evan drove down the dim highway, the sudden blackout hit like a wave. Entire blocks went dark at once, and the distant sound of alarms mixed with the echo of sirens racing somewhere he couldn't see. He slowed his car, unsure if the outage was local or widespread. With no traffic and no lights to guide him, the road felt endless. Halfway home, Evan noticed something strange on the side of the highway. Flashing hazard lights blinked faintly from a large vehicle lying on its side. As he came closer, he realized it was an armored cash van, dented, broken, and scattered with loose money glinting under passing headlights. His first instinct was concern, not suspicion. He pulled over and stepped out, scanning the area for anyone who might need help. The guards were nowhere, and the silence around the wreck felt unnaturally heavy. Evan took a few steps closer, trying to understand what had happened. Tire marks carved deep grooves across the asphalt, and the metal doors of the van looked forced open. Before he could react, the sharp glow of a patrol cruiser lit up the scene. The officers inside saw only one thing: a lone man standing beside a compromised armored vehicle in the middle of a blackout. They radioed it in instantly, reporting what they believed to be an active suspect. Evan sensed their suspicion before they even stepped out. Something about their hurried movements and tense posture told him he was in danger of being misjudged. Fear crept in, and without thinking, he backed away toward his car. His heart thudded in his chest as he imagined being blamed for something he didn't understand. The police moved to intercept him, but panic overruled reason. Evan got back into his car and drove off, hoping to clear things up later. But within minutes, the situation spiraled beyond anything he could control. Dispatchers spread his description across the county. Officers on every frequency heard the same message: the suspect from the armored van incident was fleeing in a dark sedan. Evan didn't yet know it, but his life had changed the moment those hazard lights came into view, setting off a chain reaction that would turn him into the most wanted man in the state. The moment Evan left the highway, the town of Westford began transforming into something unrecognizable. Within minutes, patrol cars multiplied on every major street, forming a web of flashing lights that trapped anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the middle. Officers coordinated through rapid-fire radio calls, each unit receiving updated directions to intercept the fleeing suspect. To the police, Evan wasn't a confused bystander who had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. He was the one responsible for the wrecked armored van, the missing guards, and the scattered cash. That assumption shaped every move they made, turning the entire town into a giant trap designed to corner him. Evan drove through side streets, believing he could slip away from the worst of the chaos. But the town reacted faster than he expected. Roadblocks appeared at every exit like they had been waiting for him. Officers stood behind concrete barriers with flashlights aimed at oncoming cars, checking faces and matching them to the description broadcast across the county. Evan passed one checkpoint going the opposite direction and saw an officer pointing at his vehicle, already reaching for his radio. He ducked into a residential street, hoping to lose them. But even the neighborhoods were flooded with patrols. Police cruisers crawled slowly along the curbs, scanning driveways and alleyways, prepared to respond if anyone reported a sighting. Gas stations and convenience stores displayed Evan's grainy driver's license photo on their screens. People filling their tanks recognized him before he even stopped. A few stepped away from their vehicles, ready to call the police the moment they could. Evan felt the weight of 1,000 eyes turning toward him. He abandoned the idea of stopping anywhere for supplies, knowing someone would alert authorities the second he entered a building. The manhunt was no longer limited to trained officers. It now included every resident who believed they were helping capture a dangerous criminal. When Evan realized he needed to get out of sight, he turned toward the edge of town where the forest began. The dense trees offered the only cover he could find. He left his car behind, slipping into the darkness of the woods. The sound of engines grew louder as officers discovered the abandoned sedan. Within moments, the forest lit up with flashlights cutting through branches like beams of white fire. K-9 units barked as their handlers pushed deeper into the trees. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, sweeping the area with searching glare. Evan crouched low, breath shallow, knowing the manhunt had escalated beyond anything he could outrun. What he didn't know was that the more he hid, the more convinced the police became that they had the right man. Investigators at the Westford Police Department were working around the clock to strengthen the case against Evan. With the blackout causing confusion and pressure coming from state officials, every officer wanted answers fast. The armored van robbery had already sparked public panic, and the disappearance of the guards made the situation even more urgent. As detectives dug into Evan's background, they found something that seemed at first like a breakthrough. Years earlier, Evan had worked maintenance for the same security company that owned the damaged armored van. That detail spread quickly among the officers, reinforcing the idea that he wasn't just a fleeing suspect, he might be the mastermind behind the entire operation. Old digital records showed Evan had repaired van doors, checked security locks, and updated internal wiring. Those tasks, which once seemed like ordinary work, were now viewed as potential signs that he knew exactly how the armored vehicle operated. Analysts pulled up archived computer logs and found Evan's name linked to files containing GPS routes and access schedules. None of this was unusual for someone in his former position, but in the midst of a frantic investigation, coincidence looked a lot like intention. Detectives pieced these details together and created a narrative that appeared convincing. Evan had experience, access, and the technical knowledge to exploit the system. Meanwhile, news channels began sharing these findings with dramatic headlines. Viewers across the state heard that the suspect had a deep connection to the armored van company. Online forums filled with speculation, with strangers accusing Evan of planning the heist for months. Some even claimed he had intentionally caused the blackout, despite having no evidence. Rumors spread faster than facts, overwhelming the investigation with outside noise. By the next morning, Evan's public image had transformed from a warehouse worker into a dangerous, calculated criminal capable of orchestrating a large-scale robbery. But the real truth behind the incident remained hidden. A small group of criminals had been targeting the armored van for weeks, studying routines and vulnerabilities. They used the blackout as a distraction, executed their plans swiftly, and escaped before the first police car arrived. During their preparations, they had accessed old stored data, including files Evan once managed years earlier. His digital fingerprints, left over from routine tasks, became part of the manipulated evidence the group used to cover their tracks. Some officers noticed inconsistencies, such as timestamps that didn't match or missing entries that suggested tampering. Yet the urgency of the chase left little time for deeper analysis. With every hour Evan remained at large, pressure increased, making it easier for investigators to ignore unusual details. The perfect scapegoat had already been chosen, and each new discovery seemed to push Evan further into a story that wasn't his. Evan had been running for nearly 48 hours, and the exhaustion had become a physical weight pressing down on every step he took. His clothes were damp from the cold rain that had rolled in during the night, and the forest floor had turned into a soggy maze of mud, roots, and fallen branches. Every noise from the snap of a twig to the distant hum of engines kept his nerves stretched tight. He moved cautiously between clusters of trees, searching for places to rest without being seen. Each hour felt longer than the last, and the fear of making a wrong move haunted him constantly. The world outside the forest kept closing in, as if the entire state had decided to swallow him whole. By morning, authorities had expanded the manhunt far beyond Westford. What began as a local search had grown into a coordinated operation involving state troopers, neighboring counties, and specialized units. Drone teams scanned the forest canopy while helicopters hovered at low altitudes, using thermal cameras to pick up traces of human heat. Officers on foot spread out in long lines, moving systematically through the trees. Evan could hear their voices echoing through the forest, growing louder each time he stopped to rest. Even when he believed he had put distance between himself and the search teams, the sudden roar of engines or the flicker of a spotlight reminded him how little room he had left. Hunger soon became another enemy. Evan found an abandoned shed on the outskirts of the forest rotated slightly off its foundation, its windows broken from years of neglect. He slipped inside for shelter, hoping to stay hidden long enough to regain his strength. For a while, the shed offered a rare moment of silence, but that silence was pierced when he heard dogs barking in the distance. He knew he couldn't stay. With shaky legs, he pushed deeper into the woods until he reached a drainage tunnel he vaguely remembered from childhood. It ran beneath the old highway, and he hoped it could carry him past at least part of the search perimeter. Inside the tunnel, the air felt heavy and damp. Water dripped steadily from cracks overhead, and faint echoes bounced off the concrete walls with every step he took. As Evan moved toward the center of the passage, his foot struck something solid. He crouched down and found a waterproof backpack wedged between debris. When he opened it, his heart sank. Stacks of cash were wrapped tightly in bands stamped with the security company's logo. Metal tools coated in dirt and grease lay tucked beside them, along with masks that matched the ones described in news reports. The realization hit him hard. The real criminals had used this tunnel and hidden evidence in hopes it would shift blame elsewhere if discovered. He pushed the bag farther into the shadows, aware that if police found it with only his footprints nearby, the case against him would become impossible to fight. As he approached the far end of the tunnel, the rumble of vehicles above signaled that officers were already gathering near the exit. The beam of a flashlight flickered across the entrance, growing brighter with each second. Evan knew he had run out of places to hide. The chase had reached a point where one more step in the wrong direction could end everything. Just when it seemed certain that Evan's escape would end inside the narrow tunnel, events far from his location began shifting the entire investigation. At a small highway outpost, a patrol officer was reviewing dashcam recordings from the night of the blackout. The footage had been overlooked due to the chaos, but as the officer replayed it frame by frame, a detail stood out. A dark SUV with no license plates had sped away from the scene of the armored van crash minutes before Evan ever arrived. Its windows were tinted, and its back bumper showed a dent identical to the one connected to a series of unsolved robberies across the state. The officer flagged the footage immediately, sending it up the chain of command. Detectives began re-examining the case with fresh eyes. They compared the SUV to reports from neighboring counties and found matching descriptions from the previous heists. For the first time, the rigid structure of the narrative surrounding Evan began to crack. Analysts digging through server logs discovered unauthorized access to secure files in the security company's system. This time, the fingerprints didn't match Evan's credentials. A different user ID had been used to retrieve route schedules and door codes, a person the company had quietly dismissed months earlier for suspicious activity. It became clear that someone had manipulated archived data that still contained Evan's old maintenance records to make the digital trail point toward him instead of the real criminals. With this information, commanders overseeing the manhunt made a sudden decision. They halted all forward movement toward the tunnel and ordered units to pull back. Helicopters lifted higher into the air, patrol lines withdrew, and search teams were instructed to pause immediately. A message spread through every radio frequency. Evan Riker was no longer the primary suspect. Officers who had been minutes away from cornering him inside the tunnel now stepped aside, giving him space to emerge without being treated as a threat. As Evan crawled out into the daylight, he expected to be surrounded by drawn weapons and shouting officers. Instead, he faced a cautious but controlled perimeter. He surrendered without resistance, his face pale from exhaustion and fear. News crews arrived swiftly, capturing the moment he was escorted not as a captured criminal, but as someone authorities now believed might be innocent. Reporters broadcasted updates that spread across the state, explaining the sudden shift in the investigation. Public opinion, which had turned harshly against Evan, now began to question how quickly assumptions had been accepted as truth. Over the following weeks, detectives pursued the real culprits. The abandoned SUV was found hidden in an old storage lot, containing tools identical to those in the drainage tunnel backpack. Fingerprints and DNA tied the vehicle to a small group already known for targeting armored vans. Their eventual arrest confirmed everything Evan had tried to prove by surviving long enough to be heard. Though cleared of all wrongdoing, Evan struggled to return to normal life. The sound of helicopters and flashing emergency lights stayed burned into his memory. He became a symbol of how easily an ordinary person could be swept into a storm of panic, misinformation, and rushed conclusions. Yet his story also served as a reminder that even when an entire state seems convinced of someone's guilt, the truth can still fight its way to the surface if it is given the chance to be found.